So I don't know what else can I say. Maybe I can just play the images. Really, thank you, Nader, for the generous introduction. Thank you for the opportunity of being in Cooper. I'm happy to present this lecture as a complement to the exhibition that will be in the corridor for maybe a couple of weeks more. So what I want to do with this lecture is show the itinerary in which the works that are presented outside, say a selection of 6, are inserted, so that you're able to see the reasons, sometimes the chances that take us to think about these projects and actually get to build them. There's not a linear path that we follow, for sure. And the work of the office, as you might have realized if you have walked along the corridor, is a work that spans across programs, across territories, across scales. It's true that we like the big scale and that construction and the way that ideas are materialized is fundamental for us, for the way that we design and we think about architecture. And something that I want to highlight about our work, and I kind of realize as when we have the opportunity to look at our whole career holistically, is that there's quite a balance between the works that we develop on our own initiative, at our own risk, like the Menoscopian House at the top, and the works that we are commissioned. So there's a big amount of work that happens because we take everything we earn as architects in our commissions and we put into research and into the construction of other works that we want to develop. We are kind of a small family. We work, Anton García Abril, who is seated here, and is the major responsible for Ensamble Studio, and Javier Cuesta, our amazing partner, a building engineer. We work together in every project. We kind of sometimes exchange roles. We learn from each other, from the conflict of the conversations, from the collaboration, and it's something that we try to preserve even as the office grows. Our first works happened in connection with Santiago de Compostela, a historic city in the north of Spain. We started being very local architects, where the presence of history was very important to us, and also the materiality. The works that we developed in Santiago de Compostela had to be built in stone, and that immediately drove us to a palette of materials that we had to work with. And as architects trained in Spain with an interesting technical education, but still having the responsibility as an architect of the whole of the construction process and working with very low budgets, we felt that we needed to complete our education understanding the processes of manufacture, the processes of production of materials, in order to be able to operate and to build and then be responsible for that. So in the first 2 works that are located in the same site, very close to the historic center of Santiago, we had to build with stone. And we look at what industry offered as a final product. And of course, having studied amazing ancient architecture, knowing what other kinds of forms could stone take, and also learning about the Neolithic tradition in the area, in Galicia, we decided to explore further to better understand the origins of the material and to go to the landscapes where that material is extracted from, to be able to think with more freedom. So this visit to the quarry was very important for us, and it has then taken us to visit factories and other sites of production when we are studying or looking at other kinds of technology. so that we were able to insert ourselves in the change of, in this chain of production, in the moment where we really wanted to be. So the conversations with the quarry owner, with the quarry people, were very fruitful. The first work that was completed in Santiago is this music school, where, as I say, the working with granite, with the local granite, was a given, and the volume was also a given in this project. When I entered the office, this project was reaching conclusion, and I entered when Anton, at that time, I was probably a student in 4th year, I think. So for me, it was a discovery, because Anton was, they had recently completed this building, and Anton was saying, there's this empty plot here. Why don't we propose something there? They want to build residential. It's a garden in the historic center where there are these different musical programs. Let's try to think about something that makes more sense, that in a way completes the cultural activity of the site, and let's put together a client with the mayor. And coming out from university, I didn't know that this was possible, that an architect would really come up with a project and sell it. But I was lucky enough to, as a very young architect, be involved in this process from the beginning of the design. And essentially what we proposed is to make a thick wall that we would build this boundary that was would have very interesting a stone wall that in a way would translate and transport the landscape that we had seen in the quarries into this garden, and that would relate to history but in a very contemporary way. And we developed these spaces in between walls. We built a model, we built a project, we found a client, the General Society of Authors and Editors, who after continued to be a loyal client to us. We went to the mayor, we told him the story, he loved it. It not always happens like that, let me tell you, but in this case it did work. And also we knew that, or we learned in the process that no contractor was willing to build this stone wall, because we were reusing spare materials, spare stones from the quarry, so they didn't want to take responsibility for us. So the only way that it could happen in the end was us becoming the contractors. So we were terrified at the moment when it happened, but I think it has been the best gift that we have had. So in our visits to our quarry, we discovered, I think it's important to hear the noise of the quarry, because here it's, it's kind of, imagine this for not 24 hours, but 10 hours or however. So we learned about the techniques, and we discovered there was a lot of spare material, irregular stones that are not fit to go into the chain of production. So they pile them here. And they are, a burden for the quarry, because they are all over the place. The only thing that they can do with it is crush it and turn it into gravel. So we went to the quarry owner and we said, okay, we want to reuse this material. We want to remove it from your quarry. It's okay, and he was super happy. So we went back to the office and we tried to represent this, to represent the wall. And we didn't have the tools to really think about this. Of course, today we would go with our mobile phones, we would scan the stones, we would have the full catalog, and we would build an amazing, super precise 3D model. But at the time, we didn't have that technology, so we were struggling on how to represent this, and we found that the model was our best ally and has persisted as such throughout the years. And it allowed us to design with uncertainty. We were able to control the scale. We were able to think about a concept of a structure. We were able to test form and composition. We were able to test an idea of a space, the space in between this thick wall, and also define a strategy of how we wanted. But we did not. It was impossible to build the final wall because we were reusing all this material that we could not catalog easily. But we had a plan, and we were building in the historic center of Santiago. It was unthinkable that we could move all this spare material into this amazing, beautiful garden. So our plan was to build the quarry, to build the whole wall in the quarry. Of course, we could not tell the quarry owner something like this because he would have said no. So it was some kind of love story that we had to develop with him. We went there, we said, okay, let's try just to see the scale and to kind of rehearse the maneuvers with your machines. Let's put one stone on top of the other and see how it works. The first times it was not easy, so he realized that maybe it was not, one stone on top of the other, but maybe 2 or 3. So we continued to develop the wall. I have to tell you that I had to move to the quarry for 4 months because it was impossible to get these people who had been working, in their own fashion for many years, asking them to build differently. It was impossible if we were not there, if we did not demonstrate our commitment. So from time to time, the quarry owner would call Anton and he would say, can you remove this girl from this quarry? This is not working. She's asking me to put my workers, in impossible places. And possibly he was completely right. I think sometimes we were not completely aware of what we were doing, but these were the first tests. You can see how awful the technology, the recording technology was at the time, but these were the videos that we produced, advancing the wall little by little until we were able to build it completely in the quarry. And it might seem double effort, but I think this was the only way we could have arrived to this point. So by this time, we had already rehearsed, we had written the script of the performance that we need to repeat on this precious site of the historic center of Santiago, and we had trained ourselves in all this uncertainty. So now we had a certainty, we had the design, we were able to test it structurally and to fix the things that were not completely working, and we were ready to disassemble it and transport it to the site. And this was, a real happy moment with the quarry owner and a life experience for me that transformed my vision as an architect completely. So we moved one by one all the stones to the site. The quarry was 1 hour away from, 1 hour and a half away from the site. And now with all that training, we were able to assemble the wall on the site, on this garden, and complete the whole building. A building that holds a public space, almost like a street in this garden, and that hides underground the performance spaces for the artists and the production spaces that are connected to the other musical buildings in the garden. And this was a way of translating this landscape that we had seen in the quarry into this garden. Where you can see the big scale of these stones that are the size of the stones that already existed on the site. We really made very little transformations to those pieces. So while we were building Santiago, we were also getting ourselves familiar with different technologies, different ways of materializing architecture. We were developing our own way of learning about all these things that we were not experts on. And we did a very interesting visit to a precast concrete factory. We had always been fascinated with the scale of the infrastructures and the beauty of these very synthetic and artificial structures. And we found this beautiful symmetry of beams that they called, and of course our mind connected to the Santiago quarry, and those spare stones. And again, we wanted to, take these stones and take these beams and do something with them. We had earned some money with doing the sky building, the stone wall, and we decided to spend it into commissioning our first work to ourselves, which was a house that we wanted to create with these kind of structures. The house is the Merscopian house that we call. It's a reinterpretation of a courtyard house. So the central space becomes an open space that is not delimited in its four sides. It is embraced by the structures, but it opens to the landscape in different ways. So there's an helix of structural elements, of traces that define this enclosed space of the courtyard that becomes the heart of the house. Again, the model here becomes the way in which we can design these. At the moment, we thought we were going to be building with these spare beams that they had in the factory. So we were trying to organize and to develop the helix of the helix of spaces embraced by these structures. Finally, it was not possible, again, for liability things, and because the structural concept of the house was challenging. But we were able to use the molds that they had available in the factory, and that implied committing to the scale of these elements. We were able to use them to cast the new pieces. So here you can see this a video that is also available in the exhibition outside with very nice music. That the kind of parallel thinking and the way that we use the model as a way to think about the space, but then a way to think about the construction and to plan the construction. So there is a simultaneous itinerary when we are designing, and we are already thinking about how we are going to build and how things are going to come together, and how the final architecture has this legibility in which the way things are assembled become also evident. And the building, when the structure is completed, all the space is there. The architecture is there, and it's just a question of delimiting and enclosing the different spaces. But you can see there's really the structure is the one that is defining the spaces. It's resolving the support of those spaces, but it's also expressing. And it's, in this case, transporting the scale of an infrastructure into a domestic space. So this house is, in a way, an experimentation about this translation of a scale, so decontextualization of a technology, but it's also a revision of a courtyard and a new interpretation. Courtyard with all its part, the water, the vegetation, the space, the flow of the air inside this space. This is our house in Spain that you are invited to visit if you go next week, and this is where now we are accommodating our office. And this is a video that we developed when Spain was winning the World Cup, so we had all the family gathered. It's not that we are soccer fanatics, but I think it's a nice video to show the dynamics of the house and how everything happens in this, outdoor space that connects the different spaces on the house, And something that we discovered with this house also is how, with these very heavy elements, we were able to actually build very light spaces. After doing this house, we were invited to a competition to renovate a slaughterhouse in Madrid. Again, an historic context. In this case, we were working with these amazing warehouses from the beginning of the 20th century that had served their purpose and now wanted to be transformed into a cultural center. And the program was a MediaTek. The client wanted to build a second story within this space. And I think we won the competition because we were able to propose this new space while preserving the memory of the place there, almost intact. So what we proposed was, after having experienced and learned from precast concrete technology and the benefits of prefabrication within Merescopian house, we proposed inserting through the windows, doing most of the construction effort offshore in a factory, and then introducing with very precise maneuvers these elements through the windows to their final position. And the way that, so you can see, the two different warehouses, by introducing these bridges of activity, we were providing that second level, and we were also connecting the two warehouses and turning two independent spaces into one, in a very simple gesture. These bridges were designed to fit the windows. We were very lucky that the engineers in the early 20th century were really precise and really good, and everything was quite well aligned. And we also had a good yard in front of the warehouse that allowed us to do this maneuver. So this is something that now looks kind of fluid and easy, but it took us quite a lot of time to engineer, and the client was so scared that we would really kind of demolish or do something very bad to the historic building. You can watch this video outside. I don't want to stop it, but I know we have limited time. So, you can see the distinction between the previous structure that remains untouched, and how the new structures, also with this very industrial nature, are inserted in between the spaces without touching. And how, as we knew with the Merescopian house, these heavy elements would feel very light in that space because of the span across the whole warehouse. So they became bridges of activities supported by these windows and allowing the space to flow underneath. And again, this dialogue so important between the history without being romantic, but really how to preserve it and how to continue it, was something that was very important to us in this project. And with the client that we developed the stone wall, the SGAE headquarters in Santiago de Compostela. We developed our first work out of Spain, which is this theater in Mexico City. This is the moment when we realized that the office at some point cannot be local, and that we are starting to work abroad. And this was a theater that was meant to be inserted in the Carso complex, where Carlos Slim has his big headquarters in Mexico. So it's, again, a very, not historic, but very sensible context, where Fernando Romero had developed the Somaya Museum, and David Chipperfield developed after another museum. And we actually didn't have a site. I mean, there was no buildable area left in the garden. So, but the client had arrived to an agreement with Carlos Slim that they wanted to build somehow a theater, and they wanted to insert it into the commercial center. And what we proposed was actually to insert the theater underground, occupying the void that had already been opened for the parking, but reserve part of that space for the theater, and just build up kind of structure that would in a way suggest the presence of that space, but that would participate of the kind of the landscape experience of the garden. So you can see how the theater is hidden on the ground, and on top appears this structure that again wanted to be very light in the garden. It was permeable to the sun, and it kind of reinterpreted the public spaces that these Mayan pyramids create, but inverted, creating an excavated sequence of lobbies underground, and then protected by this thick structure that, because it was supported by these elements that had different structural and spatial function, it appeared to be almost also floating. So the role of these supports was associated with their structural function, with the way that, for example, this first one is responsible for evacuating the water on the roof, but also learns from these kind of experiences where forms sometimes hides the function, and by doing that, the whole structure was able to move and feel lighter than it really was. We had learned from the Santiago de Compostela wall how important it is for some of these structures to build them off the site, to, in a way, in a very controlled setting, resolve all the uncertainties. And when it happens on the site, everything is designed and it's ready to be built. So with a very similar strategy, we built the structure on the factory, and then the process in the construction site was much more easy to control, and there were no surprises, technical surprises or economical surprises when the structure was built. And of course there was a training that had been developed, a training that we had developed in ourselves, but then knowledge exchange that we had done with the experts building with steel structures. This is how the structure appears in the garden and hides pushes all the space of the theater underground in a sequence of public spaces that go from the street level to the level of the theater underneath. So with the different new projects that we were getting and developing, we changed office. We changed to a larger office, and we decided also to again spend what we had earned in another experiment that we wanted to do, this time in an amazing landscape in Galicia that we had discovered when building one of our first works. And we wanted to build in this amazing landscape a very essential space, almost a window into the sea. And we wanted to do it with very few resources, with the materials available locally. And we wanted to build it ourselves. So it was some kind of summer workshop with the office. We took as reference the Le Corbusier cabanon that we have always admired and studied, and created a similar program in our hat. And this was the document that we produced to describe the project, where we were, writing the recipe of how we would do the construction, carving a hole in the ground, filling it with hay bales that represented the space, and then filling all the spaces between the earth and the hay bales with the real structure, with concrete, and then removing the hay bales to reveal the space. So here, space appeared almost as a surprise, that we were able to control up to a certain point. And this is us on the site, kind of following that recipe or that script that we had previously written, and again working with some level of control and some level of uncertainty, which we actually like. When architecture is able to surprise you, it's kind of a gift in the end. So we are placing all the hay bales after having built the mound of earth, and we are filling the space in between with the structure. We are letting the concrete mix with the earth. So almost we are kind of building an artificial stone. And then we are cutting where we know that we are going to find the door and the window. We are cutting the concrete to reveal the space by extracting the hay bales. And these were some of the surprises that we were looking for, but there was some kind of intuition, but we didn't know exactly how it was going to operate, but how, the artificial structure actually over the time was able to melt with the landscape and build this kind of ambiguous architecture. And these were all the textures that we were exploring, the textures against the hay bales, the textures against the plastic. And the framing of the horizon. So here you can see the change of scales. It's not that we are always doing small projects. Actually, from 2007, we've been working at different times in projects. Some of them, like the Tower of Music, commissions, tower in China, others research projects like these Big Bang towers, where we want to, as we've done with the truffle or with the Emeroscopium house, we want to explore other concepts, although here it's more difficult to get the funding to build them ourselves. So I won competition in Milan to build a residential tower, and another competition. In these high-rise projects, again, we apply the lessons learned from very fundamental works like the Emeroscopium house. And in the Tower of Music, for example, we were looking how to insert. It needed to be a vertical campus because of the urban parameters of the site where we were working. So our research and our intention was how to bring into the vertical dimension and the typology of the tower the urban scale and the urban experience of a campus, a university campus, and how to also bring the urban quality of the spaces, the public spaces that we find in cities like Valencia, where this project was to be built, And also, again, how we look at history, how we learn from past experiences, and why things were built as they were. Was it just a question of available technologies at the time? Was it a question of protection? Was it also a question of response to a climate, like the extremely warm climate that happens in Valencia? And with all those references, we created the Tower of Music that, was a tower where the different functional programs were organized, creating an helix of spaces, trying to break the scale of the high-rise into 4-story high buildings, trying to bring a domestic scale into the scale of the tower, and also inserting in these moments public spaces that would cross views and cross experience. And we were creating a thick wall that would embrace all these programs and would be able to respond acoustically to the demands of a music program, and also to a climate that required a lot of thermal control and shading. So, there's this kind of balance between what's void and what's built that we were proposing that in this tower, that we and an urban quality, and also an idea of how to build and control the quality and the sequence and the budget in the construction of these high-rise, following some of the things that we had explored in the Merscopian house when using prefabricated elements. The Big Bang Tower is another tower where we again here explode the central core to create a more urban, more open, high-rise building, where programs can be accommodated differently in the different levels. This is more a research project that we are trying now to, in a way, find the client or find the opportunity to advance further. But here are some of the ideas, that probably will take you to the Merscopian house, and how the structure is also framing the views, and it's creating a different scale and a different spatial quality. And another project that, we won a competition and we were almost ready to build, but that also, as the same as the Tower of Music, in the end didn't happen. It's quite bad news when you are working on, this kind of project that you're so sure you're going to build, and then, you get the surprise, no? And in this, we won the competition to build a residential building in this master plan. In this case, it was kind of luxury apartments, and we were happy to build a competition with Soto de Mora. So he was doing one tower and we were doing the other, and we were so sure that because Soto de Mora was there, we were going to build this project and it would happen. But anyways, we were able to develop a very interesting theme that we have continued to apply in other projects. In Milan, what the client told us is that people, when they get their apartments, they typically demolish all the partitions that are inside, and they recreate their own world in their home. So our proposition was to do that from the beginning, to design just the basic infrastructure that would allow a variety of compositions to happen inside. And here we were using languages and distributions, imagining what other architects would have done, in a way distancing ourselves from that process to allow the users to reinterpret their own frame. And this was something that solved many things to the client, and they loved it, and we continued developing it. But in the end, it didn't happen. But we were able to meet Soto de Mora, who is a great architect, and we learned a lot in this process, and we were a little bit disheartened in this moment of our lives, but then suddenly two amazing clients arrived to our lives, Kathy and Peter, and they proposed us to work, they proposed our first work in the United States, in Montana, in a ranch that they had it was their dream project where they wanted to build a music center in nature with art. It was kind of also a dream project with us because it allowed us to go back again to nature, which is a place where we always like to be. And of course we said we go. And also two other great people came to our lives, Adel Santos and Nader Terrani, who, you know, with this project that we had and suddenly the opportunity to go to MIT and fund a lab there, you know, we made the decision to move our center of gravity to Boston, where we are still located. And we funded the POP lab that, in a way, we thought would give the support to all those research efforts that we were doing on our own. And we went to our POP lab, which is basically a parking garage where we can keep building prototypes. And we decided to explode the office. So that beautiful office that we had bought to make these grand projects, we realized that if we wanted to be present in those places where we were designing, and we needed to move to Mexico, and we needed to move to Montana, and we needed to move to whatever we were building, we had to have that flexibility. And so we did it. And we moved our center of gravity from Madrid to Boston. So the first thing that we did was find a home for us. Of course, if you remember, we had this amazing house, the Merescopian house in Madrid. So the home was very important to us. We also needed to have a very small office. We have also 4 kids, so that scared us to death, coming to the US with 4 kids, education, health. So public education was very important, so that we decided to move to Brookline, where there are very nice schools, and we found the cheapest property in Brookline, which turned out to be, according to Zillow Up, this garage, 1-story garage. So you can see how convincing Nader is to, you know, move us to this home that we renovated. And this is the renovation that we did of that 1-story garage that some of you have already visited. We changed it for this, from this. So, but we were very excited because we were seeing already the potential of what this could become, no? And we were very excited with the American adventure and with the possibility of building all these new things, the lab and everything. In the lab, we continued a research that we had started in 2011 when we were trying to think about emergency housing for Japan, and we were looking at foam as a very light material to build very quick. And we designed a foam house that could be assembled by 4 people in 1 week. You know, and we had built this, and this was a home that could be assembled to create a camp, very essential unit. And we continued this research, building other kinds of spaces and structures also with foam. This is the cubic igloo in our yard in MIT. And this is a structure that, again, is just built with foam. It's mainly working in compression, so it was very easy to build. It was almost like building a model. We discovered we were not allowed to use scaffolding without a license, so we had to, in a way, build like the Egyptians, just by creating steps that would allow us to arrive to the top. And this needed to be very light. So all this research was about lightness. Because, we knew, of course, we love precast concrete, but we also know the limitations. So we wanted to explore, how to develop this technology of prefabrication, reducing or eliminating the variable of weight. And then this other experiment was how to build not walls and compression structures, but how much could foam resist in tension with some reinforcement. So here, we are also reinterpreting the technology of precast concrete, but substituting concrete with foam. And this is a small prototype that we built, testing this beam, a wall, foundation, a roof, and we left there for 2 years while we were getting the money to be able to build and become again our best clients and build our own home on top of our one-story garage. So this was the test proof that we did of the technology. Again, we tested it on ourselves, and we decided that the only thing that we needed on top of the existing house was just one big room that, as we had developed in the SIG Tower, was this kind of open framework of possibilities, a multi-purpose domestic space that could serve as a sleeping area at night, as dining, as working space, a cinema, playroom, and a garden on top. So on top of the existing garage, we designed this double height space. Because we were building with these very lightweight technologies, we didn't need to reinforce the foundation, and this was very important for the budget of the house. And then we also ended up realizing that there was no way we could build with the budget that we had built it in the US. So we designed the emergency plan of opening our Ensamble Fabrica in Spain and building it with the people in the office. So we became fabricators here. And we developed, while we were building, we were also researching and testing this technology that was then proportioned and dimensioned to fit maritime containers. And this beam was, of course, more reinforced than the one that you were seeing in the lab, because here we had to respond to fire codes and to also all the movements that these elements have in their trip as they are craned and they are manipulated. So we had to take into account all those kind of partial moments of the journey from the factory to the house. But finally we were able to put them in the containers, and we were happy actually that we were testing all of these, and it was for ourselves. If it had been for a client, maybe it would have been more uneasy. But we had measured the garage in Brookline perfectly well. We had developed all the drawings, all the engineering, and it had to work, and it did work. That's because also Javier, our partner, he's like a Swiss watch, and he never fails. So this was a magic moment for us. This house, again, as the truffle, as the Emerscopian house, has become kind of a monument for us, where it's just the starting point of something that we keep researching, that we keep developing, and now we are studying how to apply these to collective housing and other scales, using again all the lessons learned. And of course it's also now our upgraded house. Where we feel we are in the middle of a forest. With a great roof terrace that, by the way, was the suggestion of Nader. So we owe it to him. And this is then, of course, how our kids at this point, when they need to represent their dads, here is his dad with the crane, this is mom with the truck, and that's him climbing to, the nice part of the house that is this top part. So, all this research, we are applying it to other scales. I won't go into that, because I want to end up with this project. And again, as we started with the landscape in Santiago de Compostela, I will end up with this amazing landscape in Montana, where Kathy and Peter wanted to build an art center. And they looked at our projects in Santiago de Compostela, and they proposed this challenge to us, how to add architecture to this place to help create shelters, to help people navigate on the site and experience art without compromising the beauty and the purity and the vastness. So we went to the site. Part of the team, of our team, actually moved there, and we started driving and thinking, trying to forget our urban thinking, trying to forget, many of the things, the references that we had from other places, and trying to immerse ourselves in this magic landscape. We were looking at geological processes of erosion, fragmentation, explosions, to almost create a new language or a new palette to be able to work in this site. And here is where you would understand what Nader was talking about when he was talking about explosions. But we were thinking, how can we create architecture from matter, from energies? And we were, doing all these models back in the office. Exploring, experimenting.
Don't try this in the studio.
Well, there's actually amazing explosion engineering that happens when they demolish the buildings. That's absolutely controlled and calculated. So there's a science of destruction. So we are not there yet, but it's there. And these were the kind of landscapes within landscapes that we were proposing, connecting with fire, with water. This was a fountain that we were strategically located for people to be able to drink. You have to imagine this kind of very vast space, rolling hills, 11,000 acres of landscape where there's not a single tree, a single shade, or a fountain. So these kind of became infrastructural elements spread across the land that required very little maintenance. And in the office we were reinterpreting these very basic architectures that we would relate to different natural elements or different structures or different spaces. In our minds, we had all those places that we had captured from the site, but we were also allowing ourselves a lot of freedom to explore and experiment. Or a bridge that we were designing by carving on the ground and casting the concrete on that kind of path that would become the way up the mountain, and we were reinforcing the land, and then we were extracting the structure from the earth and putting it into position. This is the kind of moment of conceptual experimentation, and then there's a moment where we say, okay, how are we going to build this? And it comes immediately after. So these are some, but we actually developed a catalog of possibilities, different scales, different potential programs that we presented the client. And we said, we don't think one single building makes sense in this place. We think it should be something that will participate of the vastness, and that will really make people experience the land directly. So this was this constellation of elements that would also allow the client to develop the project over time, because this is a risky project, of making an art center in this very remote place. the client selected 3 of the pieces, 2 doors into the landscape that were connected to the 2 circulation paths that then we scanned from the model. Again, the model was the main design tool. And these are very interesting drawings where we were already embedding all the logics of fabrication, and we were casting for these pieces, the pieces horizontally, and then we were tilting them because this was the easier way to do it. And so they were, in a way, casting the earth off the ground. We completely engineered all of them. This was the second one that had a similar process but was tilted in a different way. And then this open room for performances that we call domo, that represents the spaces of the hills. In this case, the structure had to stay in its position because of it was a larger piece, it weighted a lot, and so we could not move it. So what we were doing was really doing, as with the truffle, we were doing the form work, and we were casting the piece on its position, and then we were unearthing it. So when the client confirmed that we were going to build this, we immediately went to our amazing place in Galicia, where we have the truffle, and we jumped a scale and again trained ourselves in the process of building these structures. And we rehearsed at another scale, but already studying these methods of construction and writing the script of what would be performed on the site, already experimenting with the textures, with the structures, to then go to the site and be ready for construction and be ready to convince the different agents involved in this, because when it arrives to this scale, you're no longer building a model by yourself, and you're actually needing to engage a lot of people. And we needed to make adjustments to the available resources, we needed to make changes, and all was for good. So these structures of landscape, we call them like these, because they are casted in the land. They, in a way, reinforce the land and create a space in them. We were, the way that they are casted with the plastics or against the earth respond to the need for different acoustics, for example, more reflective surfaces or more shiny surfaces reacting to the light of the landscape. And the moment of unearthing was, again, as in the truffle, a moment of discovery, a moment where we were, in a way, relinquishing control and allowing for nature to take over. So these are all the processes that are hidden. And now when you see these pieces in the landscape, all those invisible process, all the engineering, all the effort that is behind is erased. But we like to remember them. But now in these, in their final position, some people might think that they belong to the landscape, that they were always there, because they have this strange familiarity. They provide the shelters into this vast territory, and in a way they mediate between the scale of the landscape and the human scale. And they have an ambiguous condition between art, architecture, and nature. We were not pretending to be architects or artists. We were just doing what we thought was right for the place, and in an absolute harmony with relationship with our client. So I think they are as responsible of all of these as we are. And they create these continuities with the landscape. They do participate of the art program, so they can be read as these additional pieces that happen in dance with all the elements. But they do have architectural properties. Their surfaces are designed to bounce the sound, and actually they become instruments in themselves. Their thick masses are able to control the temperature and protect from the snow or the rain. And they are waiting to be activated by people and by music, but they are also perfectly well by themselves without a program or a use. So they, in a way, they enable habitation without exploitation. Thank you very much.
I know it's late, but let's reserve a few minutes for questions and answers, and then we'll have an entire semester left to ask more questions. So I've said enough, so I leave the floor over to you.
How long did the construction for the house in Boston take? The assembly process?
So we were in the factory, in the assembly, on the site.
Yeah.
It was there were 7 containers, and it had to be 7 days because we didn't have a place to stock, just the small parking spot where we were able to stock actually the roof slabs. And so it was perfectly coordinated movement where the container left the port where it had arrived. It arrived home, and there was a crane waiting, and we were assembling one element, one container at a day.
So like the joints between different parts were fabricated together with the parts, like, so we just put them together like Legos?
We fabricated everything in Spain, and then we organized the shipping so that we had all the containers were in the same ship. And when they arrived, they had numbers. We knew which pieces were in which container, and we just told the truck, okay, you bring this container this day, the next day you bring this container, and that way we were able to assemble the whole house without the need to stock somewhere the material.
And it's like a model without using a glue.
It's like a model with, well, it's not glue because it's dry construction, but there are moments in which we are putting one beam on top of the other, and then we are tying those with steel bars and screwing and creating, especially the structural continuity. Not for the vertical loads, but for the wind loads, it was important to tie that also to the existing garage. We were lucky that the existing garage was cement block, and that provided enough support for the house to be built on top, of course, because it was also lightweight. But we were connecting those new structures to the existing garage, screwing some steel elements that gave the continuity, and then we were sealing the joints.
In the first project at the quarry, where you built the wall of stone, that first question, that was all held together by gravity, right?
Yes.
No bolts.
There were no bolts. In the quarry, it was pure gravity. when we arrived to the site, the security measures were different. So during the construction, because the wall was stable when it was all completely built, there were partial moments when there was a lack of stability, and in order to secure some of the pieces, we added at some point bars that then we wanted to remove, but the client didn't want to remove, so in the end they stayed. But the fact is that there's a triangulation, and also the thickness of the wall makes it behave as a very stable.
And you said that at the end, after you built it the first time, it gave you the opportunity to test and fix. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, what did you test and fix?
We tested structurally, so with the big machinery, we were bumping the wall. Because the structural engineer, of course, he said, I cannot do anything with a model. This is not a final thing, so there's nothing to do here. But then he arrived to the site and he said, okay, it looks stable. We trusted especially the quarry people because they had some kind of invisible X-rays that they were able to locate these hidden cracks in the stones that we were unaware of. So, for example, they did locate some stones that they felt had interior cracks because that was a moment when the wall could become fragile, and they substituted some of those, and we changed some of the stones that maybe were not having a good support, or they needed more connection in the base, like very slight modifications. Or sometimes we were cutting the base slightly, to provoke that better touch or contact between the stones.
Thank you.
Yes.
There was one project where you mentioned that you paid attention to historic preservation, and then there was also the project that you did in Montana, which I'm not sure if it was intentional, but you preserved some sort of quality of the environment. So I just want to ask, if they were intentional, how would you say to approach that in projects in terms of preserving, whether it's the environment or the historical aspect?
Yeah. I mean, for us, history is kind of a natural thing. We live in, we've been born in Spain, and we've discovered architecture, all the historic architecture that happens in Spain, and of course in other parts of the world that we've traveled. But it's a natural way to read the context, whether that history takes you back to the Neolithic period or before that, or whether it's a shorter story, But paying attention to the context, to react to it, to incorporate it as a fundamental ingredient, or to have a different kind of conversation, I think that's kind of something that every architect, I'd say, needs to take a position. And for us, it happens in all the project. Of course, when we are working in a vast landscape, the conditions are radically different than working in an urban setting or in a historic city center where there are other rules. So some rules are imposed already by the codes, and other codes are codes that you have in your imagination, or that you construct in a way.
I find very interesting that, maybe like a comment, because your work is so interesting at many levels. And talking about the codes, what I find very interesting is that in a way you're modifying almost everything. Like you're creating, in a way, you're not accepting the parameters that are available as common architects, but you're reformulating and opening up new parameters for your architecture to be able to emerge. Both at the landscape level and at the level of building. So I find it very interesting and fascinating. So I just want to congratulate you, because it also reverberates in your own life and is very evident. So the parameters of your life and the architecture of your life become a little bit like a Merzbau, right? Like a way of living and a way of doing and a way of thinking and a way of producing things. So I really congratulate you.
Thank you.
You achieve a higher level of architecture, at least for me.
Well, I don't know if it's higher. It's just the way that we know how to do it. And it's true that when you are trying to go beyond convention or push the boundaries or discover new paths, you sometimes need to create those parameters and have to in a way, create the story so that others, in these cases the cities that need to license or can interpret and can follow, and there are very thin lines sometimes. But that's also why we, from the early projects, it was either if we wanted to build the poetic visions that we had in our mind, we had to bring that poetry to the construction, and we had to do the construction actually, because some people just didn't understand, and we understand that because sometimes it's easier. Structures of landscape is a project that if we had not built, people would just think, okay, that's another nice idea, but or the truffle, or the stone wall, that when you see it built, it seems okay, yes, it's possible, but when you are telling the story to somebody, and you see their eyes and you see that they're not following or willing to take the responsibility or the liability to build that. So sometimes you, in a way, you have to enamor people or try to get them excited and try to make them believe what you are believing, and that we were lucky to learn it from the quarry experience, which, quarry men are very tough, and it was really tough to bring them into our world, get them to change their daily dynamics and get them to build this crazy structure in the middle of their quarry, occupying a lot of their resources, their material, their time. Because some architects have this idea of doing it, and in the end they wanted to keep it. So this was the amazing thing for us. This was like the compliment, that we received with the quarry owner, where we said, I don't know if we should, make it from scratch and we keep this in the quarry, and we were like, no, please. No, that's a good moment, when you realize that when other people follow you and join the boat with you, that's the perfect situation.
It's more of a comment. I just found it very interesting how you started out with this balancing act of these large stone, very, very heavy objects, then you transition that materiality to the lightness of the foam that can retain the language of these original, massive, almost monolithic structures. To ask within that, what was the strangest thing for you in the construction process of making that switch, of suddenly having something that's just as dense as your model is going from the stone?
So, we love stone and we love precast concrete, but that brings some limitations because of the weight. And then you realize that, the kind of dimensions of the element respond actually not to the loads that they need to carry, but their own loads. So sometimes, the loads of life in a building are, nothing compared to the loads of the materials. So all this research with lightweight materials, was to try to erase that element, the weight, from the equation, or reduce it and see what happened. And we were discovering a lot of things from the easiness of building, and you could see when we were moving the beams in the lab, we were moving them with book trolley, versus the huge trucks and the cranes and the, this heavy machinery that costs a lot of money. And also that opens a whole possibility of new contexts, contexts where, people really need to be doing things with their hands and moving things with their hands, and there's not. So also, part of some people that come to visit us in MIT and they see the lab and they see, how we having all these robots and things, we are building everything, with our hands. They ask the question, why are you doing this? And it's because, we want to prove it that there's this versatility of doing with that, and then we know that it can be perfectly automated. That's the easy part, So, there's this kind of easy construction component that opens new possibilities. There is the question of when you reduce the weight of the building, you reduce the weight of other elements and of the budget. Like, for example, in our Ticlopean house in Spain, we did not need to reinforce foundations, and that was a huge thing that would have cost maybe a lot of money to be able to build a new house. So, there are a lot of, but then we keep that solidity because that implies thermal mass. It implies, in many cultures and the culture where we come from, this solidity has also a psychological thing to it, where it means protection, it means shade, it means thermal properties that we like about stone and that we like about concrete, and that we with foam we are exploring and we are also able to get. So we are also in the process of discovery. We have not solved all the variables. We have built our home, which is already a proof test of many things. So now we can approach a client or a developer and say, hey, we want to do this kind of housing, applying this technology. Before, they looked at us and they said, like, are you talking about foam or what? And they're not ready to listen, But if they see something that is real, that is there, that they like, that they touch, and you've been there, Some of you, you touch and it doesn't feel like paper model, It feels solid, it's a completely different story then. So that's something that I don't know if goes in favor or against, but it's part of the way that we operate, is that we have realized many times we need to do things and then we are able to talk about them.
I guess I'm just really in awe of the mental fortitude that it really takes to be able to do these projects, and also the boldness of using your own life as an experiment to almost legitimize your active building, and also just short-circuiting the idea of building by just doing it yourself. And I guess I'm just curious to see, also being a mother, raising 4 kids, also moving across, I'm just interested to know about if you forecast the experiment for yourself where you built a home in Boston. Do you see that there's kind of some reciprocity in going back to Spain again and again and again? And do you feel like the experiments are going to continue to become more lightweight in a way? Or I guess I'm just interested to know where you are seeing yourself go next on the 2 trajectories of building and then also personally.
So I think we are adventurers. We don't like to make long-term plans because they never happen, and we like to be very open. So for our passion, I think it's clear. It's architecture, and this kind of mixture between research, practice, education. Really teaching is also a big effort. But that gives us other energy, other contacts with the reality. So this balance is what moves us. So as long, I think our goal is to keep this balance, but we cannot stay. We don't know how to wait for the opportunity. We just go for the opportunity and go to look for it.
Have there been times though where you've been in, like living for 4 months in the quarry, where you have severe doubts, where you're like, is this going to work? And
more than severe works,
like that.
I have not forgot, but I arrived home crying almost every day, like literally destroyed. And I sometimes called Anton and he was like, I cannot do this anymore. This is impossible. Imagine a quarry, the noise, but also the people, these men. I didn't know there was no like toilet or no like minimal infrastructure. It was so a burden, like this noise. And at that point, I didn't even have like the vision of
Yeah.
You know, now when you see it and it's completed, it's amazing. For me, it was kind of a military service, no? But
You almost have to be hard-minded as a Galician, right? To be able to do this.
but it was pain that I realized I loved, because if not, I would have quit. I mean, there was, I was not forced to be there. You know, I realized that I was learning while in pain. I was learning a lot, many things. I mean, from basic things that you learn in university and then you see applied. When you see the things, you learn them much better in construction, to how to really talk to somebody that does not speak the same language, because you come from this discourse of university, and you have to communicate with people, you have to understand them so that they are able to understand you, and this is also a personal and human experience, and I think the success was that we moved. I mean, and I was able to move there completely, and that implied that every day I was traveling an hour and a half to the quarry. I was doing the work. Sometimes I was going back to the construction, supervising the foundation work and everything. I was drawing at night all the plans, because we were the contractors at that time. And I arrived exhausted,
I think that's what's also missing from the story that you told too, is revealing that struggle.
Well, there's a lot of pain behind all the works. I mean, of course, you want to stay with the nice things, but there are a lot of not missed opportunities, but projects in which we have worked so much, and then suddenly you know that you are going to build this. Finally, you're going to jump a scale, and this tower, and the project just, in one day, it's out of the question, and you are left so. Actually, it's a risky business, because our practice does few projects at a time. That's the only way that we are able to really be present in all the phases, and that means that sometimes you are in moments where you have no commission, so you have no stable source of income, and you are spending, especially when you decide to, okay, let's build this experience, and let's build the truffle, and let's spend everything that we have been earning for 2 years, let's put it here, and we do it because we believe in it. I mean, economically, it makes no sense, and that's why I think there's not an economist in our team, Maybe we need a business developer, and we would do much better. For example, now we have this moment where, we want to be jumping a scale from our house and developing, other housing prototypes, and we are trying to convince developers, but that takes a lot of time. So, Anton just told me this morning, I think we are going to rent this warehouse, this yard, and we are going to build a factory. So we are now in a critical moment in our company, where we are about to, take a major decision. Do we want to push this further? Are we waiting for somebody to join us, or should we do it ourselves? And I think that's the way that we have learned to be architects, and that's the way we operate. And I think we wouldn't know how to do differently. That doesn't mean it's the best way, or it's the only way, or it's the way everybody has to follow. It's something that, I think we have this kind of adventure mind where we like taking these risks, also because we have proved to ourselves that they are worth it. So it's kind of a learning curve. For example, if you see structures of landscape, that project probably would not have happened if at some point we had not decided at our own risk to build a truffle. And suddenly, 5 years after building the truffle, we get this client with this amazing, where these ideas that we had explored suddenly make sense there. So, in a way, we are trying to go ahead of time, developing these ideas about architecture that we can after apply in other places, programs. And about your question about being a mother and an architect at the same time, again, it's a question of passion. I think that it's a balance. It's a balance, and when there's something that you love, you have to make things compatible and make things work, no? And then you have this is the last one. Then you have, we have this amazing kid who has this image of his mother and his father, and it's his mother and his father. He wouldn't understand life with a different mother and father, no? So that's what. Yeah. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.